Welcome to the Retail Focus Podcast, a weekly collection of news, interviews, and information from the world of retail. Here are your hosts, Trent Kling and Layton Kling.
Welcome to this Black Friday edition of the Retail Focus Podcast with Trent and Layton Kling. Coming up on today's show, well, we've got a lot of previews of Black Friday and the holiday shopping season, a couple of data-centric reports we're going to talk about with interviews from both Cardlytics and CBRE from the real estate perspective. We'll also talk about earnings from Target, Best Buy, and Kroger as they open a new state-of-the-art warehouse. Since we're working during the holidays, I know so many retail employees are as well. Please give us a rating wherever you find us. Also, be sure and subscribe wherever you access us on a weekly basis. Our Twitter and Instagram accounts at Retail Podcast as well. And Layton, we'll start out with our initial Black Friday impressions as we always do with this show. Too early to tell returns. I know some media outlets a little bit fretful about the fact that traffic is down. We'll actually talk about that in our two interviews coming up today and why traffic might be down and why not to worry about that. But in terms of what you're seeing, what was your Black Friday impression so far?
So far from what I've seen out there in the retail landscape, it's been pretty busy, and I'll talk about that at the very end for my looking ahead story and how some of my retail experience was and really the strength of the traffic numbers that I saw, again, anecdotally, but retailers like Target, Walmart, Kohl's, all saying very positive things surrounding Black Friday sales that for a lot of retailers started yesterday. But very excited to see these results coming in, and I'm excited about this podcast in that we're talking about third quarter earnings, and they're all giving sort of their own predictions about the momentum coming into this holiday season.
Got a chance to see a couple of retailers on Thanksgiving. Dick's Sporting Goods, pretty much universally busy, although throughput really struggling. Took a long time to get through there. Target, though, we just talked about their new digital initiatives with the mobile checkout. We're going to talk about them in the first story again today. That worked to a T, at least the Target I went to, in and out very quickly. It seemed like they had it down to a well-oiled machine, even though there were a lot of people in the store. Not a huge wait. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about Target's third quarter earnings, which were reported this week. Their profit just missed, but indicated how much they're investing in holiday logistics. A lot of people on the market went nuts. In fact, Target was down double digits in terms of percentage at one point in time on the market. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why that might be an overreaction by the market here in a little bit. But I think the key numbers Layton and I are interested in, same-store sales, net income, they were both strong. We knew there were going to be extra expenditures on both the e-commerce and omni-channel side. That certainly bore itself out, which is why the profit just missed. But the net income grew over 23% to $622 million, or $1.17 per share, compared with $478 million, or 87 cents per share in 2017. So we're talking about a big jump in terms of net income year over year. Adjusted earnings per share came in at $1.09 versus the estimates of $1.12. This is what sent the stock into a brief tailspin on Wednesday, and regardless of what the street was anticipating, CEO Brian Cornell said that earnings per share were well within the company's own expected range.
And I think that's the most important thing here is that CEO Brian Cornell and his entire management team, they've been pretty transparent about their expectations for the third quarter and the fourth quarter. And I think to your point, to your earlier point, I think this was sort of an overreaction on the market, around 10% of a decline on their share price. And after the report, I think a lot of people were scratching their heads saying that, well, you know what? This is more or less what we expected out of this retailer. If you're going to really throw up your hands after this quarterly report, you may want to stop following the stock market, because this is more or less what we expected and what a lot of others expected out of their third quarter. And with that, now let's look at the revenue. Revenue beyond expectations from Wall Street analysts, coming in around $17.82 billion, around $20 million more than what analysts were anticipating. Total sales for the company grew over 5.5% year over year. Same store sales up 5.1% versus the 5.2% growth that was expected. The missing of Wall Street marks here should be downplayed, as 5.1% in terms of a comp is phenomenal for general retail right now. There were over 5% more transactions in the quarter for Target, but average ticket was down 0.2%. This is worrisome for us, at least just a little bit. This has more to do with promotional pricing, though, as of late, which has definitely brought more customers in, hence the traffic increasing for the retailer, but at a cost of gross margins. So Walmart's latest quarter actually showed just above 3% same-store sales growth, and department stores like JCPenney actually showed declines. So there is a caveat here with Target, which is digital sales are included in same-store sales. Luckily, they say how much digital sales actually affected those same-store sales metrics. Those digital sales, by the way, increased 49% in the quarter. That was a major reason why we saw those 5.1% comps. Without digital sales, Trent, same-store sales would have hit around 3.2%, more or less matching Walmart's latest growth figures. But the gap between total sales and comp sales is explained by having just a few more stores, a few smaller footprint stores in more urban areas throughout the country. They're trying to penetrate more densely populated areas that are really liking the concept thus far. Gross margins did, in fact, fall for their latest quarter. They fell to 28.7% from around 29.6% a year ago. Margins lead us into the main part of Target's story here, in that costs have been accelerating in preparation for the holiday season, trying to really boost those omni-channel initiatives. They've been spending more money, deploying capital to improve nearly every facet of their business. Again, CEO Brian Cornell first talked about the expenses on the official earnings call and how they were related to a lot of their brick and mortar business. So he said that while digital sales and omni-channel infrastructure have boosted traffic, the massive amounts of store remodels have certainly played a part in the over 5% traffic increases they've been experiencing. They admitted that it is tough to know exactly what drives incremental traffic to their stores, but said that they have isolated remodeled stores versus controlled stores, or in other words, stores that need to be remodeled or haven't been refreshed yet. And those refreshed stores, the stores that they've been putting money into over the past few quarters, have been doing much, much better. And that actually, in terms of the big picture, played a large part in that particular comp for this quarter. 2 to 4% of an increase over the older stores that still need to be refreshed. It is not only remodeling or refreshing stores, it is how they've been devoting more sales floor space to areas that we keep mentioning over and over again on this podcast. In some stores, they've devoted over 20% more space to toys. Toys are popping up in areas that have historically been used for seasonal decorations and that type of thing. Toys, baby items, and beauty products were all strong categories for them, and some of the main areas where they gained legitimate market share. And this is a company that actually talks about market share a lot. They keep their eyes on nearly every functional category, and they said with these main categories that had some improvement, they are definitely gaining ground on their competitors. Perhaps the best thing about this quarter was the tone that management set from the get-go. While many were happy with the quarter, they seemed to be eager to keep reinvesting in the Target brand overall and do more than just maintain the market share that they have, but rather increase it in the quarters to come in the various departments where they think there is a greater opportunity.
And their digital investments, of course, always centered around creating the best customer experience possible. I think the same could be said of a lot of different retailers, but specific to Target, they had mentioned advances in restock, the drive-up program as well, and their partnership with Shipt for 2-hour delivery, making even the most incremental improvements here could cost millions of dollars up front, which is kind of what we're seeing and one of the reasons why their margins were down this quarter. But they're finding that customers are taking full advantage of the flexibility afforded to them, so they feel like these are good long-term plays. And employees, like with any new initiative, have been having to learn how to deal with a larger amount of services. It's not simply just 1 or 2 services in the store. Now you have all of these different services here, including the restock, the drive-up program, and the Shipt program that we mentioned. The company, honestly has had to reach out to these employees, train them, but also they've been criticized recently for lack of structure with scheduling. As we noted, actually, after their second quarter, they've increased wages, though, for the latest quarter. That, too, has affected the bottom line. So a few different things. Layton mentioned the promotional pricing. Also, you've got the additional initiatives. So you've got capital expenditures here. You've got additional expenditures for digital channels, and you're increasing wages. all of that contributing to the whittling away of margins, which was basically what sent shareholders into a minor panic this week. They say that new investments in hours, wages, and training for the team, though, directly ties into how the programs perform. Target very data-driven, and they roll out a lot of this data. Higher wages mean these digital programs are performing better. They feel like that also lets the customers come away from the transaction a little bit happier. And this makes sense because you don't want your employees to feel overwhelmed with new systems and processes, especially in November and December. This time of year, employees can get overwhelmed anyway. And if they are still feeling like they're in a constant state of catch-up, at least they're getting paid higher hourly wages to compensate, or at least it feels like they're getting paid to learn these new systems and new processes. Now, Brian Cornell did say on the call that they're trying new ideas in store so they don't require as many labor hours. For instance, Target has long been ahead of the curve with backroom fulfillment in their stores, where associates would have excess inventory in the back to keep shelves full throughout the day, something that Walmart, honestly, in their brick and mortar centers have struggled with. What Target wants to do now is be more efficient with distribution centers, basically making sure that their incoming truck deliveries act more as the back room so that people during the day can focus more on customer service. And you don't need as many people scheduled. We've talked in the past about how Target has really amped up hiring. They're bringing more associates into their stores. So it's not really a matter of cutting back on jobs. It's a matter of maybe getting the jobs in retail back to closer to where they were a couple of years ago. It really comes down to automating their inventory system. But in our view, it's already been automated for the better part of a decade, at least automated better than most other brick and mortar retailers. They're just employing a leaner, tighter system in order to act faster, get that product out on the floor when it needs to get out, not sooner, not later. Don't have stale inventory sitting in the back, which is something that's haunted Kmart and Sears for decades now at this point. The primary risk, though, here being that they have more of an opportunity to sell out of a particular item on the floor if you're doing just-in-time warehousing like this, and maybe not have it until the next morning when the night crew gets out there to stock the product. So it's a delicate balance here, as everything with inventory is, but Target is working on finding data-driven solutions for this. Overall, though, we're seeing Target okay with additional expenditures in the short term because they feel like it's winning them customers and winning them brand equity, which is going to be all important here over the next 2 to 3 years as we see this transformation, especially in the general merchandiser space.
So we take all of these initiatives and we apply it to the real world. And I recently visited a super Target on Thanksgiving Day because I have no life and my family doesn't live near me. But it was around 7:30 p.m. and the store was absolutely packed, tons of associates, many of them with handheld devices. So we talk about real world examples of what the management's been talking about. They all seemed to have digital scanners. They were ready to help customers. Associates seemed somewhat prepared in many of the areas. And honestly, this was pretty eye-opening because there were a lot of associates on hand to deal with thousands, it seemed, of customers coming in through the doors. Every register was open, to what Trent was saying earlier, including self-checkout. Everything was very streamlined up front. There were no lines. And I remember going to a Target on Black Friday several years ago, and the lines were all the way back to the back of the store. And I think that they really identified some of the key issues here. People do not want to wait in lines. They'll wait in lines to pick up the product. But in terms of checking out, purchasing the product, leaving the store, getting to their car, and going on to their next retail destination, they want that process to be as quick as possible. Another interesting thing that I found was one customer near the toy section said, and I quote, "Since Toys R Us is gone, this is exactly what we should expect from the toy aisles," as he showed his wife all of the congestion. And this really points to the fact that they have identified better usage of sales floor space. When I was at the Target, they really expanded the toy section probably over 20%. So I mentioned that 20% number earlier. You could see that customers were really taking advantage of the increased product assortment because Toys R Us is gone. But for me, it's interesting to see that the common customers that aren't talking about retail on a particular podcast, are actually in tune with the market and understand that people, especially retailers, are really trying to take advantage of the open opportunity that is the toy segment. Target did say this week that they have met their goal of hiring 120,000 seasonal employees. So this actually relates to what I just said in that they seem to have an adequate workforce to address all the customer issues, yet another big expense for them as they turn into an important time in the rest of the fourth quarter. But it seems as though, again, this is all in line with company expectations. Shares of Target, ticker TGT, fell over 10% on Tuesday to $69 a share. As of recording this podcast on Friday, the shares are hovering right over $67 a share. This is a company, by the way, that saw all-time highs in September of this year, over $90 a share. Current price to earnings ratio around 16 and a $36 billion market cap.
Well, coming up after the music, we'll discuss with Dani Cushion, the CMO of Cardlytics, just how much toy market share is up for grabs and what we can expect this Black Friday. She'll also talk about an interesting thing in the reason why when we say don't fret about traffic numbers potentially being down on Black Friday, we mean it because more people shopping throughout the holiday season evenly. We've talked a lot over the past 3 to 4 weeks about data around this holiday season, and who better to hit up for more data than Cardlytics? Of course, they analyze a massive amount of transactions every single year. We're joined by the Chief Marketing Officer at Cardlytics, Dani Cushion, who's here to break down some of this data. Dani, great to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be back on, Trent.
Now, the first question, I think it's important to do this every time we have you on. Just where is this data coming from, and how does Cardlytics get a hold of all of these transactions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a company, Cardlytics runs bank rewards programs for about 2,000 banks in the country, including Bank of America. We actually recently just launched with Chase Bank as well. So if you're a Chase customer, you now get to see the great rewards that come from Cardlytics and different marketers. But since we run cashback rewards programs for these banks, we actually use purchase data, which is completely anonymized. We don't ever see actual individual customer information, but we get to see purchase data at scale because it allows us to actually make for a better cashback rewards program for both the banks and for marketers. So across all the different banks that we work with, we see about $1.5 trillion in annual spend. That actually will be going up significantly once we finish rolling out Chase in the coming quarters as well. But since we get to see such a huge swath of consumer spending across credit cards, debit cards, ACH bill pay, we actually get to have a pretty nice handle on what are customers doing from a shopping perspective. And then we work very, very closely with our marketers, with the different brands, to be able to help them actually reach consumers with relevant ads based on where they have spent in the past, rather than just guessing at what they might be doing and what they might be buying. This is not a survey. It's actual purchase data at a pretty grand scale. So we're data people here at Cardlytics, so we like to dig into the data and look for trends to try to help others drive their businesses based on the kind of insights that we see.
And recently, you just released the 2018 Holiday Spend Report, and I want to go through some of the numbers here. The first thing on page 2, in fact, of the report, so as first as you can get in a report, talks about the channel spend distribution. I think the overall narrative is that there's a lot of e-commerce pure plays that are snatching market share away from legacy or more entrenched brick and mortar retailers. And I think the data is interesting because it suggests that pure play is there, but they may not be snatching as much market share as we thought.
Yeah, this was an interesting one for us to see this year. We always like to pull the data and see what it tells us. You know, we all know that online shopping is growing significantly. We anticipate it will continue to do so. However, for the holidays, it still only makes up, the pure play online players, so the Amazons and the eBays and those kinds of online only stores still only makes up about 11.5% of overall spend during the holidays. So it's really easy to think that those pure play online players have all of the share of spend. They don't. About 80% of spend is still happening in a store. So that's pretty interesting. But as you referenced, what we would call brick and mortar.coms. And so these are the online sites for retailers who do have a physical location. So if you think about Macy's has Macy's.com. And if you think about a Target has Target.com. These types of brick and mortar.com stores, online stores, have actually been doing a pretty good job of holding up the walls against some of the pure play online retailers. So even though brick and mortar spend year over year dropped by about 1.5%, the brickandmortar.com spend rose a little bit. And so online pure play rose a little bit, brickandmortar.com pure play rose a little bit. Our takeaway from this is that the folks who have a physical location are getting more and more savvy about enhancing their online stores, driving people online, making sure that they are really thinking about how the customer wants to buy. Lots of customers still really want to shop in a store, but for those that actually want to shop online, there is an alternative to Amazon, and the brick and mortar stores that are putting out their own e-commerce solution front and center are doing a really good job of stemming the tide against the larger pure play online players of the world.
Some of the more interesting data that I like to look at regarding holiday spending is in regards to not only Black Friday and Cyber Monday, but the rest of the holiday season. I think an interesting thing that's borne out in the data that you have year over year, 2016 to 2017 at least, is it seems that wave is kind of flattening out where we're not seeing these big spikes in certain areas of the calendar. What are some of the dynamics you guys are seeing there as far as the waves of spending that happen in the lead up to the end of December?
What we've seen is Black Friday and Cyber Monday used to be a pretty significant peak. So if you're to picture a graph, and what I will say is in our holiday report, if you actually want to see this visually, you can go to holiday2018.cardlytics.com. But what we actually see is if you graph out how spend has happened across the course of the holiday, so really from early to mid-November all the way through to the end of December, it used to be a pretty significant peak in the middle around Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Over the last year or two, and actually even more significantly this past year, it is flattening out. So people are buying both earlier and later. And so the line of how spend is actually happening in the holidays, people are getting their stuff done early. There are those that are leaving it later as well, but it is not as pronounced a spike in the middle right around Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And actually, what we see is actually 30% of the spend, of holiday spend, actually happens in the 4 weeks before Black Friday. I think from a marketer's perspective, there's a real opportunity to make sure that you are starting out strong and making a difference in getting your marketing in front of customers as soon as they are ready to buy, because we've seen from the purchase data that customers actually do really want to knock out their lists in many cases.
The purchase data also suggests at least that you might be able to taxonomize the shopper in different ways. And there are 4 interesting clusters that you've kind of placed shoppers in, or bins that you've placed shoppers in. I was wondering if you could talk about those and some of the ramifications of that information as well.
Sure. So we end up pulling this type of data pretty early in the year because we do work with our marketing clients just to try to help them plan for the holidays to make sure they're getting the most market share they possibly can. And the way that we actually can look at the data is we cut it based on really 4 segments of shoppers. And so you can actually look at how are shoppers actually shopping over the holiday and how can you actually customize how you're marketing to them, whether it's through channel or through messaging, and what really matters to each of these different types of what we would call a timing cluster. There are really 4 distinct buckets. So we have the early birds, so those that spend well before Black Friday. We do have the Black Friday warriors, so then Cyber Monday, so those that are actually concentrating their spend right around the deal area of the holidays. We have the procrastinators, which we've actually seen increase a little bit over time, which are those that are leaving it to the last minute, but that have started to rely more heavily on shipping guarantees and ease of access. And then steady shoppers is actually the group that ends up spending the most throughout the entire holiday season. And those are the people who are sort of slowly checking down their list. They go all the way from November all the way through December. And the reason it's important to look at these different types of clusters, and we can sort of talk about what are different characteristics for each of this group, if helpful, but it's really important to make sure that what matters to an early bird, getting things done efficiently, making sure that you're completing your gift list quickly in one go, is really different from what matters to procrastinators, which is really different from what matters to the Black Friday folks who are all about a deal, which is different from the steady shoppers. So from a marketing perspective, knowing your audience and knowing how to address them in a way that actually matters based on how they like to shop. We've seen working really well with a lot of the marketers that we work with because it's a lot more impactful than doing a survey about how somebody might like to buy. There's a lot of really interesting trends that we're seeing for each of these different groups.
And I wanted to ask you about that marketing too, because take procrastinators and those Black Friday or Cyber Monday warriors, for example. Between the two of them, according to your data, make up about 41% of the holiday shopper, but then steady shoppers make up 40% of the holiday shopper, and they spend more than the other two groups, yet we don't see a lot of messaging towards the steady shopper when it comes to marketing. What are some things that retailers or brands can do to reach out to that steady shopper and gain their trust throughout the holiday season?
It's a great question. It actually really starts with the steady shopper. It starts before the holiday season as well, and it actually starts in what we see in September, October for those, and it's a little too late for those that are just starting to think about it for this holiday season, but truly, reaching a holiday shopper is about reaching shoppers all throughout the year and getting them to be loyal to your brand. For a steady shopper standpoint, it's really just making sure that you don't focus as a marketer on one distinct segment or time frame over another. So if you're really putting all of your marketing dollars in the Black Friday or Cyber Monday, the point is that you're missing a whole lot of spend that you could be getting otherwise. From a steady shopper standpoint, you can do certain things like offering progressive discounts, making sure that you're available for them through an omni-channel perspective whenever they're ready to buy and staying top of mind. While the messaging might not change necessarily, Trent, it's more about making sure that you are top of mind in the channels that they want to buy whenever they want to buy. Whereas the distinct messaging for an early bird can be really about getting your list filled or filling, stockings with stocking stuffers. Like Under Armour is actually a brand that has been doing this really, really well through their CRM lately. I love Under Armour, and so I end up getting all their emails. And they've been really smart about reaching early birds in a really elegant way. And it's not shoving the holidays down your throat, but it's trying to hit a need for the shoppers based on what they care about.
Once again, we're joined by Dani Cushion. She's the CMO at Cardlytics. So moving into those different categories of shoppers, once again, we just talked about steady shoppers, some of the differentiation between them and the early bird or the Black Friday shopper. Something I found interesting, almost counterintuitive, if you will, from this data is that procrastinators of the four groups spend more at new brands than any of the other three groups. And you would think, procrastinators might go back to that same well every holiday season, but that seems a little bit different to me, at least. What were some of the things you found out in regards to that average spend at new brands, not only for the customer groups, but just in terms of new brand spend in general?
Yeah, I think for new brands, I'll start with the procrastinators because that was a little bit of an interesting counterintuitive one. One thing that, since we do look at when each of these groups are spending and how they're spending, so since we are able to see purchase data, we can actually see whether they're shopping in a store or online. With the procrastinators, they do tend to be very heavy online until the end, until the very, very end, until the last week or so. And we actually see a correlation there with new brands. And so if you think about the folks who are leaving it to the very last minute, they're going online, they're relying on the last minute shipping, they're making sure that both at brickandmortar.com and the pure plays, that they're taking advantage of the shipping deals. But after a point, they get past the point of no return on the trust for shipping getting there, and they go back in store. And that's actually where we're seeing a lot of brand exploration happening, whether it is at a mall, believe it or not, people are still going there, and they know that they can walk away with something very specific. The procrastinators, when they go back in store right before the holiday, are willing to end up going and trying something different because it is convenient and they know it's guaranteed.
And one final question regarding this year's data, and then we'll talk, or at least the 2017 data, and then we'll talk about 2018 and kind of looking ahead to this year. But one of the things that I know Cardlytics is always very good about covering in the data is where retailers are winning new customers. Where did retailers win new customers last year?
I think the ones that actually have a brick and mortar presence did a very good job of winning them online. Whether they are stealing shares specifically from pure play online retailers, we do see that to be the case, but they're also making sure that the retailers that I've seen win here are the ones that are actually really, really considering how to think about how the customer wants to shop. And so we are actually seeing the retailers that are doing a good job are winning, not just in store and holding up the walls and slowing that decline in store, but making sure that their online presence is really strong.
Now, in terms of 2018, I know you guys at Cardlytics, data junkies as much as anyone certainly can be. What about 2018, or what about the data coming in for 2018 excites you when you go back in January, February, March and start paring this down? What are you going to be looking at or most excited to find out?
We're actually starting to look at it just now, and we actually have seen a lot of marketers being smarter about how they plan their marketing and media campaigns to start now. And those that do it in a nice way are actually starting to get a leg up from a market share perspective. The kind of stuff that we look at in the first quarter, and really as we start to sit and help brands map out how they actually want to spend with us and run their media with us through our bank channel through the year, is looking at how do they do from a market share perspective. And so we can actually help them understand, they know when they were running their marketing. We know when they were heavying up against certain types of shoppers with us in our media channels. We really like to look from a category and then down to a brand perspective. Where did they win? Where did they win? Where were they struggling? Where were they from a share perspective against folks in their category? Where were trends shifting as far as what people were buying? We have seen over the last year or two that there has been a pretty good shift from things to experiences. Now people are still certainly buying things, and we have seen the overall year-over-year holiday spend still increase in actual terms. But people have shifted a little bit into how they're actually buying. And there are a lot of things like travel, and there are a lot of things that actually can help inform a marketer to understand, okay, if I'm thinking that people want a more experiential buy, what can I do to make sure that I can scratch that itch for them, even in a store? And it actually can help inform marketers' merchandising in store, all kinds of different things through different facets of their business. That's the kind of stuff that we find really interesting to help use the data to help inform strategy for our brands as far as how they can actually gain share, even beyond just a media buy.
Once again, Dani Cushion at Cardlytics, CMO. Thank you so much for joining us once again on the podcast.
Thank you.
Well, we thank Dani once again for joining us. Third time she's been on the podcast over the past couple of years. It's fantastic every single time. The folks at Cardlytics churn out such great data. Love to see that. Well, with one company in Target losing market value in what could be an expense-related overreaction, Best Buy's earning beat actually did little to move the stock this week. So we didn't see a reaction in the other direction for Best Buy. Best Buy's stock market run between the beginning of 2016 to January of this year saw the share price rise around 141%. For the most part, that epic run has come to a complete standstill this year. Shares are actually down nearly 10% year to date, but we see that volatility there. It's taken place with Best Buy really over the last 4 years if you expand that map out. Now, Best Buy has been growing e-commerce out well as they continue to perform minor brick and mortar consolidation, particularly with the Best Buy mobile locations that they closed down. Even though we could sit here and contend that Best Buy has continued to lose out on opportunities to maintain or grow market share in certain categories, they're focused to be more service-oriented. You see a lot more messaging surrounding those blue shirts in their TV commercials. And to make sure their website is up to par and their pricing on what they have left to sell in brick-and-mortar locations is competitive has proven to be a profitable strategy, a sustainable path in the face of critics 5 to 6 years ago proclaiming that Best Buy was the next Circuit City. I don't think we're in that situation, but we're in a situation where Best Buy has certainly become more of a showroom. And we think back to all of the electronic or appliance-related closures that may have helped Best Buy, not only Circuit City, but also Radio Shack, Ultimate Electronics, H.H. Gregg, and now Sears, as many of the remaining Sears locations no longer carry consumer electronics as they once did. So Best Buy, all this talk about toys, but Layton, in reality, Best Buy has probably benefited the most from closures in the last few years.
Yeah, you would like to think it's sort of like Dick's Sporting Goods, where you see a lot of their competitors leaving and then Dick's Sporting Goods taking over those markets or just being okay with the markets they're currently in. And in line with the rest of the retailers we are covering this earnings season, this latest earnings report from Best Buy represents their fiscal third quarter, albeit for fiscal year 2019, just like for Walmart. Revenue for Best Buy was $9.5 billion, up from $9.32 billion last year, and $20 million greater than average estimates. The same thing with Target. Same-store sales came in at a very healthy 4.3%. Analysts were expecting the mid 3% range. And looking back to last year, Trent, they were up against some rather tough comparable periods. Third quarter in particular saw same-store sales of around 4.4%. This was also on the back of the retailer closing some underperforming stores in its conventional store portfolio. So over the last 2 years, Trent, they have focused on closing a few dozen conventional stores, some of their larger Best Buy locations that just weren't up to par. So this quarter, we should actually look and say, maybe it wasn't the easiest quarter to actually beat, because honestly, all in all, you have to look and say that their store portfolio now is probably consisting of some of their best performing locations. And we spoke about Best Buy Mobile, and we'll get into those numbers in a bit, but some of those stores, they just weren't bringing in the top line revenue that they had first sought out. Net income for the company of $277 million, or around $1 per share, is up from $239 million last year, or 78 cents per share. On the adjusted front, accounting for one-time expenses, they brought in 93 cents per share. Analysts, they were actually expecting 8 cents less overall. Net margin for the company of 2.88%, which is pretty good considering their high level of reinvestment, and consumer electronics being a very, very tight market in the face of online competition. We talk about the tight market and how pricing competition really has played a part during this Black Friday season. And even though they are no longer having to deal with many brick and mortar retailers, like we said, they still have to treat the entire market as sort of a war zone in terms of consumer electronics. And Target's net margin, for reference, was around 3.5%. So not far off from that, but still a high performing company, and a company that we thought would still exist if you were to ask us 5, 6, 7 years ago. However, not in this capacity. They're still highly profitable.
And a lot of that profit is being driven from domestic sales, which represented a bigger part of Best Buy's business during this last quarter. Something that kind of reminds us of Walmart's renewed U.S. interest, to be honest. Domestic revenue now makes up 91.3% of their top line as of the third quarter. Now that's a 3.1% increase, fairly significant increase versus last year. So more of their revenue coming from domestic sales. Domestic online revenue of $1.21 billion increased 12.6% on a comparable basis. So not high teens, not 20s, not 30s like we're seeing from other retailers, but still increasing for Best Buy primarily, they said, due to higher conversion rates and increased traffic. As a percentage of overall domestic revenue, online revenue did increase 110 basis points to 13.8% versus 12.7% last year. So what you're seeing from Best Buy in this circumstance, more sales going online. Their online sales are increasing, not as much as what we're seeing at other retailers, but they are still increasing, and they're helping to drive overall revenue increases. Now, their CEO, Hubert Joly, said that their mobile application has improved such that customers should be able to rely on reviews more, which we know is something that really drives Amazon's business in terms of electronics and consumer appliances, and pricing reliability as well, instead of shopping around on other websites when they arrive at a physical Best Buy location, certainly helping out with their mobile app, working well with that physical location. And while we think improvements were certainly warranted, and we can see them visually taking hold as online and app users ourselves, such as the scan and compare feature, for example, which is really, really handy, keeps you from having to go to multiple websites. We also think that customers will always be shopping and comparing frequently no matter what. Customers aren't just going to take a retailer's word for the fact that they are the lowest price. Best Buy does not have every single television or electronic device on the market as well, so customers will inherently feel obligated to shop around because of different brands that are out there, no matter how offended Best Buy may get with those customers shopping around. Now, other improvements they've made are fairly standard. For example, customers using the mobile app can now see store inventory levels for a watched item more in real time. They've justified these improvements by having to back up data. They said during the earnings call that 72% of customers who use the app come into one of their stores with an item already in their cart, either on the app or even on the website. So the accuracy and timeliness of these features crucial to what they're doing, especially in November and December. The last of the newer app rollouts actually has to do with larger purchases that have already been made. What they call the On My Way feature allows customers buying large items to use the app to tell their local store that they're on their way to pick up their purchase, so that customers don't have to wait long or at all when they're picking up a larger appliance item, something like a refrigerator. This is crucial. How many times have we waited on a buy online pickup store item, period, much less a larger appliance? I know there have been times where if I'm going to pick up a larger appliance or something of that nature, whether it be Home Depot, Lowe's, or a place like Best Buy, oftentimes there is a wait. So this is a way that they're removing some of that friction oftentimes we talk about with that buy online pickup in store option. They feel like all of the improvements in settings and flexibility have driven up traffic to the app. As a result, that's propelled conversion rates. One of the reasons why you do see their online sales and digital sales driven up by double digits in terms of percentage. Like we said, success has to be framed in such a way that depicts a company that's still struggling to maintain brick and mortar relevance, if we're being honest. They closed 287 Best Buy mobile and 19 large format stores over the past year. What may be most interesting is that their internal focus has been on phone and tablet sales, securing network contracts for third parties, yet Best Buy Mobile pretty much only dealt with this facet of their business and high-margin phone accessories, but in a much more manageable footprint. So it's interesting because we do hear that they are focusing a lot on phone and tablet sales, yet they closed down a lot of different stores that dealt with that. And we'll talk about another retailer in GameStop that seems to be doing the same thing going forward.
With those particular categories, we look at the stronger categories that were formally noted during the call. Those were gaming, appliances, wearables, headphones, and smart home. Tablet sales were actually said to be soft, Trent, which is interesting, but did not really surprise a lot of people because tablet sales really been hit or miss over the last couple of quarters, the last couple of years, in fact, as most Americans don't see a reason to upgrade too frequently, and prices have come down substantially in the tablet market. I remember when they first came out, everybody had to get one, and it was a huge gift idea. Well, now everyone has 3 tablets, so you don't really need to renew or get the next best thing on the market because, again, the tablet that you got 2 to 3 years ago is perfectly fine for whatever you use it for. And while they sold through much of the inventory that they doubled down on this quarter, they did see gross margins shrink a bit due to promotional pricing. Again, another promotional pricing environment here as they prepared for the November and December months. U.S. gross margins were at a low 24.4% for Best Buy versus 24.7% last year. What may be most interesting was the squeeze that was most attributable to supply chain costs, not actual product input cost like we saw with Walmart. With Walmart, we saw them admit that they did see increased expenses in supply chain, lately driver wages and fuel and that sort of thing. But they also did admit that products outside of groceries were costing them a bit more on average. And so we do know that TVs have slowly decreased in price point in time as manufacturing innovations have helped streamline some of the larger manufacturers like Samsung and Sharp and Sony. But again, you relate this to Best Buy's business. They're saying that they didn't actually incur a lot of higher expenses. They're saying that a lot of it, again, was through their supply chain. So all in all, their third quarter gross margin was still better than the company had expected, which could actually be worrisome if they were anticipating something worse domestically, maybe margins to fall below 24%. Again, other mature retailers, you're seeing between 27, 28, even low 30s in terms of gross margin here in the United States. So it would be worrisome to see them get around 23 or 22% gross margin. You would have to wonder, where does profit come from at that point? And that is a perfect segue to cost cutting, because they do realize that the gross margin issue is a real issue. It is going to be burdensome for the company long term. And because perhaps gross margins are being squeezed a little too much, they are looking to be a little bit more aggressive in their pursuit to save $600 million in expenses annually by 2021. This is actually part of their larger overarching strategic plan, and they are making strides supposedly and customer relationship software and the specialty help with the variety of the services that they offer. So while not being too specific, they did mention making some other gains in supply chain cost cutting. But overall, they said during the last few months, they were able to cut another $90 million off of their annual expenses. And I think this is good for the company, but I would like to see a little bit more transparency as to where that cost cutting is coming from and how it relates to the overall business. Is it going to hurt them in the short run, or is it part of the larger strategic plan to really just be more efficient and to be able to create the same service environment and keeping the same level of quality going forward?
Now, even with the margin pressure, analysts should probably be slightly happier than they were after Tuesday, as Best Buy raised its full-year fiscal 19 financial outlook to the following. They boosted up enterprise revenue from $42.5 to $42.9 billion. They see comp sales growth now of 4 to 5%, and also a lower effective tax rate going forward of around 24% that might help that earnings per share mark as well. Now, shares on Friday after Thanksgiving, that of course be Black Friday, ticker BBY, traded around $62.50 per share. Highs this year of $84, lows of $56, indicates some more of that volatility we've seen in Best Buy over the last 4 years. If you've had a long position in the company, it's definitely been a roller coaster ride. $16 billion market cap does offer a dividend, one that's yielding close to 3% annually on its current share price. Well, we move into a completely different sector of retail as Kroger made a big announcement. And we know Kroger is always big on rolling out new store ideas in their home state of Ohio, and more specifically near their Cincinnati headquarter location, but this time it's an innovative new robot-based warehouse that is making its debut and made a lot of news this week. We joked among ourselves via text message that robots have finally taken over, but they've taken over, in this case, low-level warehousing tasks, that is, while Amazon uses robots to augment human tasks in its fulfillment centers. Kroger may look to be employing proportionately less while still needing to hire about 410 human workers. The center will be in Monroe, a suburb north of Cincinnati. And Layton, they're going to be partnering directly with Ocado, one of the largest online supermarkets in the UK, to explore the best ways for this technology to be deployed. This is a partnership that's been in the works for quite some time, in fact, announced earlier this year.
Yeah, Ocado, in fact, has their own proprietary technology that will be used for this facility that we're talking about. And Ocado, by the way, actually just won a couple of awards in the UK for the level of service for their online supermarket platform. So this is definitely an interesting partnership because Kroger obviously sees value in what they bring to the table. So this will be done through a licensing agreement between the two companies. We visited Ocado's booth at NRF 2018, in fact, and came away extraordinarily impressed with their technology and where it was at versus others in this particular field. The interesting thing is that both from Kroger's perspective and from the other media outlets' perspectives, the underscored aspect of this partnership was actually the jobs it will create. This is interesting because in the Cincinnati Business Courier, for example, the headline was about Kroger creating, and I quote, 400 plus jobs rather than the automation aspect that we find so interesting about this program. And so Kroger's partnership with Ocado was actually announced earlier this May as part of the Kroger Restock program that we've talked about at length, along with the assumed future warehouse, or shed as Ocado prefers to call them. Kroger increased their investment in Ocado by 5% to a little bit over 6%. This came along with exclusivity that, while not in a big blow to the likes of Amazon or Walmart, who boast their own technologies in this area, may prove to be a setback for, let's say, Albertsons, Safeway, and a slew of other smaller chains throughout the United States that are currently trying to compete with the big players in the space. The May release provided at least some insight as to the runway for these potentially 20 sheds over the next 3 years. The location in Monroe, then, is going to be the first of these 20. Although this was referred to as sheds, they're really not shed size. They are massive warehouses expected to be around 335,000 square feet in size, and not cheap to build either, Trent, with around $55 million in initial investment coming by way of Kroger, and it will take a long time to build, a minute to build, expected to be ready by 2021. Construction should be underway, but again, a lot of reinvestment here, Trent, from this grocery powerhouse.
The company said at its annual investor day just a few weeks back that their first 3 locations for these sheds would be announced soon. So with this location being announced, we expect the others to be revealed in the next couple of weeks or so. But the real question is if Kroger will place the other 2 in their wheelhouse geographically, or they'll branch out to maybe other brands within their portfolio. So the question is, are they going to be in states where they have a dominant presence? We have one in Ohio already being announced. Might you see one in Tennessee or the Mid-South area? Or will they branch out into their other brands? Like, for example, Ralph's in California or King Soopers in the Mountain West could be potential options for their next warehouse, especially since those 2 brands are showing a high level of digital adoption for ClickList and other programs in those areas. They've also seen high levels of ClickList adoption anecdotally in Kroger branded stores in Texas, so that may be another option on the table for Kroger as well for one of these first warehouses. And although fulfillment plans in specific have yet to be announced as far as where the product from these sheds are going, it's thought that these Ocado-driven sheds are going to be a crucial step in digital fulfillment for Kroger. It's unclear the split between digital and brick-and-mortar fulfillment for these sheds, or whether they'll be used for brick-and-mortar at all. So far, in a lot of the announcements, the focus has been on digital. Safe money would be on digital. According to Steve Watkins at the Cincinnati Business Courier, Kroger CFO Mike Schlottman said their digital sales expect to sit at an annual run rate of $5.1 billion at the end of 2018 and $9.1 billion at the end of 2019. So given this type of growth, it's easy to see why Kroger might feel as though they need such a substantial build-out of facilities that are engineered to assist with digital fulfillment versus that traditional brick-and-mortar distribution. That's why I said the safe money is on digital distribution for these centers. Additionally, one could also understand why Kroger might favor these facilities versus pushing digital fulfillment to the individual stores, which is where a lot of it is at this point. It's forced a lot of human capital investments, additional staff in stores to pull orders, but it's also clogged up aisles with staff shoppers and their enormous staff shopping bins. If you go to a Kroger store or a Kroger affiliate, especially during busy times, these bins are everywhere. They are large, they are onerous. Sometimes they're difficult to get around in the aisles. So it makes things more difficult for the in-store shopper. It makes things difficult for the employees as well. Lately, though, too, I've seen a glut of television advertising for my local Kroger affiliate that's gone away from pushing ClickList or buy online pickup in store options and instead seeking to underscore direct delivery of groceries for the holiday season, which again is one more thing these warehouses may be able to help with by the time they do open in 2021. Well, longtime listeners of the podcast know if there's 2 things that we're really interested in here on the show, it's data and retail real estate. And who better to speak to that than someone from CBRE, which is the world's largest commercial real estate company, massive holder of retail real estate holdings in not only the U.S., but around the world. And we're joined by Spencer Levy, who's CBRE's chairman of the Americas Research, and he's also their senior economic advisor over at CBRE. Well, the first thing we want to cover is the 2018 Holiday Retail Trends Guide, which CBRE released back in late October. Wanted to talk about some of the data coming from your guys' report here. But first of all, if you don't mind sharing with our listeners where some of this data comes from and stems from.
Sure. Well, some of our data comes from traditional third-party government and other sources like the Census Bureau, the National Retail Federation, eMarketer. But a tremendous amount of our data is proprietary, coming from our econometric advisors unit in Boston, which has its own forecasting arm, along with our transactional data from our transaction professionals. So it's a combination of third-party sources plus internal sources using our econometric advisors unit and transactions.
So the report starts out talking about how robust holiday sales are projected to be this year, another mid 4% increase in 2018 projected, but it goes on to note an increase in buy online, ship to store optionality, particularly with retailers like Michael's, who we don't often associate with these strong omni-channel presences. So first of all, what is CBRE seeing in terms of this buy online, ship to store optionality? And then second, how is this affecting use of some of the square footage in these retail stores?
Of all the acronyms we've come up with recently, this BOSS, buy online, ship to store, is one of my favorites. simply because it's so catchy, but I also think it's a major trend of stores of getting people not only to buy their goods, but to increase foot traffic in the same. And the logic behind that is well founded. People not only by coming into the stores get greater store loyalty, they also have the opportunity to buy additional goods. And this is happening across the retail universe, from some traditional big box stores such as Macy's, but Home Depot's doing it, Michael's doing it, as you mentioned before, but even some smaller retailers as well. And they're combining this BOSS approach, buy online, ship in store, very often with additional loyalty programs, which give folks the opportunity to get other forms of experience retail, like tickets to shows or other things that they can do, not just things that they can buy. So I would suggest to you that the bricks and mortar stores are not only learning how to best use the online channel, the omni-channel, they are now doing it extremely effectively, and it is increasing foot traffic in their stores.
So it's increasing foot traffic, but also for retailers, it seems like they've got to rethink how they lay out their stores so as to better accommodate those that are using this BOSS optionality. So what's CBRE seeing as far as how retailers are using some of this square footage inside the stores to not only help consumers with this BOSS optionality, but also make it more seamless and pick up some of those additional impulse buys, as you mentioned?
Sure. Well, I would say it's both inside and outside the stores, as the configuration of stores and the entrance, pick-up and drop-off areas are all evolving, not only due to the internet, but also due to transportation options such as rideshare services, which is making many retailers and shopping centers have larger pick-up and drop-off areas. So the reconfiguration is both in the store and at the curbside. But inside the store, you are clearly seeing a greater focus and attention on the pickup area. If you remember, at least when I was younger, going to customer service at a store was typically in the back of the house, a very small part of the house. That is now moving closer to the front of the house, and it's getting much larger as they realize that that is now the face of the retailer. So that's getting larger. You're also seeing a greater attention on showrooming of some goods. So you go to some retailers now where you buy an item and you can very quickly check the price online, and very often they'll match that price online. So I would suggest to you that the combination of the greater pickup drop-off areas on the outside, the greater prominence of these omni-channel distribution areas on the inside, combined with greater showrooming, is really the biggest change. And does it change square footage? I would say the answer is maybe, but maybe not. Certainly we have seen some retailers taking less square footage, but we also see some that may take more, because ultimately you are going to need to have this foot traffic in an environment that makes people want to shop, and it's not always in the smallest confined space. So I would suggest to you is that the reconfiguration of space may also lead in some instances to needing more space rather than less, even though the trend recently has been to less space for many retailers.
The report mentions, and you also mentioned kind of at the beginning here, incentivizing BOSS programs, like, for example, with Kohl's, using $5 in Kohl's Cash to try and incentivize that for consumers. But one of the other incentive programs that we're seeing, and was mentioned in the report, loyalty programs. And we see some retailers like GNC, for example, they have loyalty programs. They're not really buying traffic, but you mentioned in the report Nordstrom's, Macy's, among others, great loyalty programs. What are these loyalty programs doing that sets them apart from the rest? And more importantly, what are these loyalty programs doing that are influencing traffic to stores?
Well, look, I think that the loyalty programs have been around as long as there's been retail. But I think what's happening now is the loyalty programs are getting more explicit in exchanging, not just by virtue of you buying goods, also giving you experience, because this experience/goods approach is ubiquitous throughout retail. And so not only are you getting it in the store, but you're getting it to get you into the store. So among the loyalty programs, as we mentioned before, are tickets to shows and other things that are not inside the four walls of the store. But that's in addition to giving you some of the more traditional loyalty programs, such as cash or other things that help you buy additional goods. The bottom line is that tastes change on everything in retail more quickly today than they have before, and I think that will be the case in loyalty. But I think this marriage of experience and goods is here to stay, because you're seeing that not just in the loyalty program gifts, but also within the four walls of the stores, as many of the best goods retailers now are now giving you experience in the store, and they're also providing services which are less susceptible to being bought online.
Once again, we're joined by Spencer Levy. He's a senior economic advisor with CBRE, talking about the 2018 Holiday Retail Trends Guide. And one of the things that's noted in the guide as well is the opening in the toy market share after, of course, what happened with Toys R Us earlier this year. On the show, we've noted just an extensive number of retailers attempting to hop into this space. What are some of the things that CBRE has noted trend-wise in the toy space?
Was certainly, putting aside what was clearly a bad event for many folks with the failure of Toys R Us. The failure of Toys R Us is an opportunity for many of these stores to pick up that market share, as toys aren't just a good that is sold on the holiday season, though it is disproportionately sold during the holiday season. It is also a quasi-experience item because it brings in not just the shopper, but their children and other folks, which is obviously creating a very positive holiday or other shopping experience. So toys are not just an opportunity to sell stuff. It's an opportunity to change the experience of shopping within the four walls of your stores. So we see this as an exciting opportunity for many traditional retailers who hadn't played in a big way in the toy space.
Staying with toys, in this report, CBRE discusses KB Toys, kind of a blast from the past, as well as FAO Schwartz factoring in. But KB Toys expected to open around 1,000 pop-up stores throughout the U.S. Pop-ups across all genres have been increasingly popular, but how is this affecting the retail real estate landscape in the U.S. as far as not only seasonal is concerned, but also 12 months out of the year? It seems like we're seeing a lot of pop-up stores or a lot of trends where stores appear for a couple of months.
Well, I'm going to use a very technical term now, if you don't mind me doing so. Pop-up stores and food trucks are cool. They're fun. They are exciting. They energize and enlighten your space. They activate your space in a way that perhaps a traditional bricks-and-mortar store cannot, but what they do is they enhance the experience for those traditional bricks-and-mortar stores. So this activation of the space by these pop-up stores or food trucks or other things that bring life to the space, many people say, oh, it's taking away from the bricks and mortar, and maybe at the margins they do, but overall they are materially enhancing the bricks and mortar by activating the space, bringing in more foot traffic overall, creating a more exciting experience. So I think you are going to see more of it, more non-traditional retail, I think, but also a trend that you're seeing in traditional bricks and mortar retail, particularly for many new development, are certain factors such as shorter-term leases or license agreements among many tenants that might have otherwise been associated with pop-up stores. So you are seeing some of the factors that made pop-up stores so flexible now bleed in some cases into traditional bricks and mortar retail as well.
One of the things that came up when you were discussing pop-ups, but also during the rest of this interview, is just the customer experience when it comes to bricks and mortar retail. It seems as though there's much more of a focus now on experience, particularly for those that have large amounts of retail real estate holdings. Just how much has the perspective shifted for real estate companies in terms of trying to drive home that consumer experience, making sure they come back to that bricks and mortar experience over and over again?
Well, let me start by taking a step back, and perhaps a really, really big step back, and talk to you about a experienced retailer that is enormous. It's got sights, sounds, colors, smells, has great foot traffic. It's known as the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, Turkey, and it's been around for 500 years. So experience retail was not invented today by some smart retailer. It's been around for a long time. And experience retail has been evolving since the Grand Bazaar was formed 500 years ago, and we expect it's going to continue to evolve. So I think that what we're seeing today is more of an evolution rather than a revolution in how people are using enclosed retail space. I've been at several properties recently that are all experience-based. So there's a property out in Aurora, Colorado called the Stanley Marketplace, which is all food stores. It is all co-working space. It is all gymnasium. Things that you do. It's not things that you necessarily buy, but that same type of cool culture that they have in that space is now in other spaces where people want that type of energy. That's one example of being pure, but I think the other elements of it are both putting into shopping centers, but also individual stores. Many people sell, for instance, athletic apparel might also be selling yoga classes or other types of fitness classes along with the. So very important as the consumer is evolving to many of the commodity type goods being sold online, but one thing that will never be a commodity is an experience. But I do want to emphasize that this is an evolution that's been going on for 500 years and will go on for 500 more.
A great historical perspective there. One final question for you. I know we spent a lot of this interview talking about the Holiday Retail Trends Guide, but in terms of looking out the next 1, 3, 5 years in terms of retail real estate or commercial real estate, what are some trends that you feel like we may see pop up over the next 1, 3, 5 years that maybe we're only seeing in the gestation period now?
So I think that a lot of the story about e-commerce being the primary disruptor of retail are overstated. I think the number one disruptor of retail is demographic shifts, not e-commerce. Because I think the traditional retail story of good rooftops, good wealth in the local trade zone still wins, even if you have to change the configuration of the property or the tenant mix within the property. So I think what you're going to see over the next 1, 3, 5 years is demographics driving the space much more so than e-commerce, though e-commerce obviously is a major factor in the space. And some of these demographic factors are both at the younger end of the demographic scale, as you're still seeing many more young people now, Gen Zers, move into these dense CBD environments. So you're going to see urban retail do extremely well. But also the older end of the demographic scale, I think, is going to be a major driver of certain types of retail, as over 10,000 Americans a day are turning 65. So we believe that healthcare, which is a non-traditional retail use, will become a more important retail use, as what we've seen is a fragmentation of the traditional healthcare distribution model off hospital campuses into the local communities, very often into traditional retail locations. So I think if you follow the demographic trends, that will be the major driver of the locations and the types of retail, both in the CBDs to cater to the younger set, and also in the secondary markets or suburban locations, many times often in the healthcare space, to cater to the older folks. Follow demographics, you will be following retail.
Fantastic insight. Spencer Levy, once again, Senior Economic Advisor at CBRE. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Retail Focus Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
As always, we may have a position in or against companies we discuss on the podcast. Do not invest in stocks solely on the input of the podcast hosts.
We've reached the final segment of the Retail Focus Podcast, a segment we call Looking Ahead, where we preview a story we're keeping an eye on over the next week, month, or year. We'll get to Layton's kind of looking ahead here in just a moment. But first, I wanted to mention my looking ahead story, which is regarding GameStop. GameStop looking for an infusion of cash, so they reached an agreement to sell off its Spring Mobile business to Prime Communications for $700 million. Now, the Spring Mobile business owns and operates right around 1,300 AT&T licensed stores. Now, this is the reason I'm looking ahead. Is GameStop going to use the cash infusion for good, or is it merely just keeping a sinking ship afloat? After all, their GAAP net income during their latest quarter was at a loss, and this Spring Mobile division lies in GameStop's technology brands. Technology brands, along with collectibles, pretty much the only two categories for GameStop that were up during their last earnings call. In fact, technology brands operating earnings popped 35.3% to $20.3 million during the second quarter. And this is despite a decline due to store closures. So this is one of the more profitable aspects of what GameStop is doing, yet they are selling it off. Now, you could make the argument that it's a lot more difficult to sell off a division that maybe isn't as profitable, but still, we have seen many a time where a retail brand will sell off something that is going very well for them, or a part of their brand that is succeeding. They'll sell that off just to get some cash infusion, And really, it's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. They've been looking for strategic options now for months. We get some clarity on it this week. But again, my point here is this, that Spring Mobile has been one of their best-selling divisions within GameStop and one of their more profitable divisions. How many collectibles are you really going to be able to sell? And especially with digital sales of video games becoming more and more of a thing, a lot of direct from creator video game sales that kind of cuts out the middlemen in GameStop. How long can GameStop continue by narrowing down its business model to basically just selling video games and collectibles?
Well, instead of actually doing a looking ahead story, I will talk, or at least try to talk candidly about shopping at a couple of retailers, a couple of which we talked about during this episode of the Retail Focus podcast, and my Black Friday shopping experience overall. First, I went to Best Buy, and I only shopped online, so I didn't go to their brick and mortar location. The transaction was smooth, and the deals were very transparent. They were broken down by category and even subcategory where it was appropriate, whereas Walmart's website was kind of a mess when I was shopping earlier this week and trying to find Black Friday deals in terms of them lining out certain deal categories and free shipping on pretty much everything at bestbuy.com, although there were some 10-day expected wait times on many of the deals that were offered. Checked out as a guest, which was much quicker than in the past at walmart.com historically. The deals were actually objectively good deals, which was nice because you knew you could trust that the deals you were getting were priced right, and there were less deals to compare overall because you knew that their selection wasn't going to be as great, so you didn't have to peruse as many web pages. So that leads me to Target, where I had an in-store experience on Thanksgiving Day. In fact, great amount of sales staff on the floor, like I had mentioned previously in the Target story. Training could be a little better. If there was one downside that I could point to, it's that they have the digital tools, they have the sales staff, but a lot of the people you could tell only knew their immediate areas. If you asked about another sale that was maybe in another area, they did not know anything or at least very little about that particular category. Again, a better use of space than in prior years for Target. Signage, in my opinion, could be a little bit better to direct people to specific deals, particularly I found in bath and home areas where the deals were on the end caps, but it really wasn't that clear via the signage that they were the Black Friday deals. Zero lines at the checkout and tons of security to keep things orderly, which is always a plus. You felt safe and secure. You checked out very easily, and there weren't a lot of people that were frustrated and really disappointed with long wait times because there just weren't any. Lastly, Kohl's, I had an in-store experience on Black Friday. This was the exact opposite of Best Buy and Target's experience, where they had few workers on the sales floor, terrible lines, even after noon on Black Friday. No security at all, at least that was noticeable to me anyway. Nobody at the front door really monitoring the situation. Lines headed back to the back aisles. Not a good look for Kohl's. They should have been prepared. Maybe all of the people that they were trying to hire, maybe they went to Target and were part of the 120,000 people that they hired for seasonal help. Utilizing too many different areas, in my opinion, too, for the different categories, the promotional categories. Toys, they bought a lot of toys, but then just didn't know where to put them. It was fairly obvious because toys were right next to the men's suits, for example. So not a good look for Kohl's. People very frustrated in the lines. I could see a lot of frowning faces. Like I said, not a lot of people on the sales floor to really help the people looking for the specific Black Friday ad sales. So big disappointment for Kohl's. I'm curious to see how that is going to really appear to them for the fourth quarter financial results. The winner of the three, I would have to give it to Best Buy, if for no other reason than it really surprised me. A much better experience than expected. By the way, I spent around $700 between all three retailers in all. Between Thanksgiving Day and Cyber Monday, the average American is slated to spend upwards of $335. So I think maybe now I overspent.
Well, it's okay, Layton, because I spent $0, so we even out. Together, we're the average American. All right, well, that'll do it for us on the Retail Focus podcast. For Layton, I'm Trent. Again, check us out, Twitter and Instagram at Retail Podcast. And we'll be back a week from today with more retail news and information.
This has been the Retail Focus podcast. For more, visit our website at retailfocuspodcast.com and subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. Follow us on Twitter at Retail Podcast.